nation. That was uncovered, and they tried to stamp these people out by executing them, but that didn't work. They, in fact, proliferated in other countries. Now, that's part and parcel of the Committee of 300 as the main controlling body. This is one of its arms. It's one of its facets, if you wish.
Absolutely, because you mentioned so many different groups that potentially also then tie into this particular network. Obviously, the Royal Institute of International Affairs, also sometimes known as Chatham House, potentially is involved in this. CFR, Council on Foreign Relations, the Round Table Group, maybe even the Bilderberg Group. Do you think that all of these are essential, components, then, if you will, of the 300 group, John?
Well, my book deals with these, each one individually, and certainly they're all part of the whole, and they make a very compelling group, and they call themselves the Olympians because they believe that they were specially chosen by God, that they were above all other men and all other creatures on the earth, and that they were specially selected by God, and they had God-like powers, and like the old Greeks and the Olympians, they believed the same thing. So this is where that name came from, the Olympians. And this was sort of a subtitle of the Committee of 300. And was used mainly amongst themselves and by the people who talked about it when they did talk about it in very hushed tones, because it didn't do to say too much in open public about these people. They didn't take kindly to that.
How does an agenda like this, do you think, persevere throughout history? This is one of the enigmatic questions that many people, and rightfully so, have asked about various groups that are out there. And obviously this is something in terms of philosophical thought that can be applied to any of these groups. But if we're not dealing with individuals who are in some way utilizing a technology or some kind of medicine that the rest of us doesn't know, or they're, not from around here, which means that they, live much longer, 500 years, 200 years potentially. If we're not talking about that, then obviously we are talking about people who live and then die, and new people come into this particular group. But how do you think the philosophy keeps on going throughout so many hundreds of years, John?
Well, it's handed down from father to son, and especially in the royal families in Europe. So that's what keeps them going, and it's not anything to do with the legend of the people, the giants who walked the earth here. The Bible in Genesis, and there were giants in those days, and these are not the people we're talking about. That's entirely another thing altogether.
Right. And
this is hereditary, and it's handed down from father to son.
If it's hereditary, what's amazing to me as well is that it seems like at least what we know about is no one have broken the ranks here. I mean, we have kings and queens who abdicate. They in some way protest against the situation that they're born into, if you will. And if the same apply here, do you think that there have been any whistleblowers out there that wanted to defect from this particular group, but potentially then have gotten murdered?
There were two very notable rebellions. One was Edward VI, who wanted to marry a commoner, Mrs. Wallace Simpson from America, and abdicated the throne of England in order to do so, thereby abdicating his responsibilities towards the Committee of 300. And they never came to anything, as you know. And then the second one, of course, was when John Kennedy was told about he had to take his orders from Chatham House, and he said, "I'm the President of the United States, I don't take orders from anybody." And in defiance of this group, he started issuing U.S. Treasury banknotes for the currency, not the stuff from the Federal Reserve Board, which is worthless paper, and it's not even a promissory note because it doesn't bear the legend, "I promise to pay it." In fact, it is just nothing.
Yeah.
And he said, I'm going to have United States money printed, and we'll get away from the interest of the huge interest charged by the international bankers and their control, and we will have the greatest prosperity the United States has ever seen. And for that, as you know, he was assassinated in Dallas, and that book contains probably I would say, without wishing to put too fine a point on it, that's probably the finest account of the assassination of Kennedy that you're going to find anywhere in the world. And that's contained in the 300 book, and that's why his face is shadowed into the background of the cover.
Mm.
So that's what happened to two people who've tried to break away from this group.
So murder is a common tactics that they use when they want to silence people who potentially then can actually go out and speak more officially and openly about what is going on. Is that correct, John?
If they're unable to bribe them or to coerce them into obeying, then they'll eliminate them. It's as simple as that.
Mm.
And that's what we saw with John F. Kennedy. It was a clear case of he'd said, I'm going to issue the proper currency for the country and we'll enjoy unlimited prosperity. And once the control of the money has been taken out of the hands of this group, then they're powerless. But while they have that control, they're all powerful. And you know that the Federal Reserve Board in the United States is one of their organs, one of their institutions. And Kennedy was determined to bypass that. And as I said, it's probably the most extensive and well-detailed and well-documented account of the assassination of Kennedy as you're going to find anywhere in the history of this episode.
Mm. Many people obviously jump to the conclusion that anybody who is in a position of being within royalty or close to royalty are being sacrificed for maybe similar reasons as well. There, Princess Diana, maybe even the Romanovs, if we go back to Russian history, might be part of this. Do you think that that's true, or do you think that people extend or read too much into those kind of situations? Accidents maybe are happening as well. What do you think?
I think I've got a paper all about the monograph, a very extensive one about the death of Princess Diana. Mm. What happened in her case was quite simple. I'll tell you about it in a second. It's also in the book. She embarked upon a travelogue, if you like, stopping all over Europe and criticizing the Queen and revealing the most intimate secrets of the royal family. And she also took on criticizing the selling of mines, anti-personnel mines.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
And the biggest supplier of those, the biggest trade of those is done from Britain. Britain supplies most of the anti-personnel mines that are sold. And so she was treading on the toes of very rich and very powerful people. And once she was in Paris, she got a visit from two MI6 men. And they told her, Princess Diana, you're a nice little girl, you're nice. Just go out and enjoy a good life. You've got all the money you need. You've got all the opportunities for a good life. So just be a good little girl and go out and do that, and don't interfere in things that are going to cause you problems. And she chose not to deliberately. She chose her own course, and she told them virtually to go to hell, and she would continue doing what she was doing. Well, it wasn't very long after that she was assassinated by them. That accident was no accident. And the whole story is detailed in my work, The Death of Princess Diana, how when they entered that notorious tunnel, there were two men standing at the other side, and they had laser guns, and they fired these guns and completely blinded the driver, who lost control of the car and smashed it into the center post and then hit the side wall. And, of course, the car was completely wrecked, and Diana was mortally wounded.
It seems...
So you don't just obey the orders from these people. If they tell you something, it doesn't matter if you're the President of the United States or you're royalty. It's not going to protect you.
That's right.
That's the message. That's the message they put out.
Because so many people who try to put a stick in the industrial wheel of war seems to end up in this kind of situation as well. It could be argued same thing with JFK, of course, with him wanting to end the Vietnam War, because again, so many of the money and the whole industry of war is such a big profit for so many people.
Yes, well, he was determined to end the Vietnam War because the Vietnam War was a farce from start to finish. Mm-hmm. And what we really went in there for was to use United States Air Force planes to bomb along the coastline and discover where the shallow oil villages were in the coast, along the coast of Vietnam. They had more oil there than they have in Saudi Arabia. And the big companies like Phillips Petroleum and so on shell company were using America's armed forces to do all their prospecting for them. It's an amazing story, but every word of it is true.
I think we also should, later when we have you back, John, with us for our second hour, talk about some of these groups that I'm going to mention now, but I'll mention them in passing so we can keep that in mind until next time. Order of St. John of Jerusalem, Club of Rome, the Fabians, the Venetian Black Nobility, the Mont Pelerin Society, and the Hellfire Club are some of the things that you go into, and this is something we can save and keep in mind for the next hour that we record later on here, John.
Well, I think so. I think so because these are very important institutions.
Yes.
Again, all under the control of the Committee of 300, and your listeners need to know about them and what their purpose was. And I think they'll be astounded to find how far-reaching the influence of these people were and what they were doing was absolutely monstrous. And people say, well, this kind of thing can't happen in America or Britain or Canada, but in fact they did happen and are happening. So it's a bit of an eye-opener when you come to grips with it.
Absolutely. So let's save that and let's keep that in mind and talk more about that later on. But let's go back to this thing that you particularly want to address here during the first hour, John, and that had to do with the two wars that the United States and, of course, many other countries are involved in right now as well, the Iraq and the Afghani war. What do you think is the primary, if there is one, reason for the fact that the so-called allied forces are in these countries right now, John?
Well, the primary reason is obscured. It's not yet been shown what they're there for. I've written many papers saying, what are we doing in Afghanistan? Why are we in Afghanistan? And we get told, well, it's for oil issues. For the oil concessions, there's this huge depository of oil there. And plus, there's this enormous pipeline running right across Afghanistan that supplies oil to China. And we want to be in there to control this. Well, it's none of our business. And we've not been authorized by the Congress through a declaration of war to be there. Mm. And the cost of the two wars in Iraq, it was the same thing. We wanted to get control of their massive oil reserves and their oil. If Iraq didn't have oil, we would never attack them. We attacked Iraq for no good reason at all. And George Bush committed a heinous crime. He flouted the U.S. Constitution. He took the nation to war without a declaration of war on the false premise that these people were harboring weapons of mass destruction. And even when it was proved conclusively that there were no such things, he still refused to get out of Iraq because the eye was on the main prize, this huge reserve of oil that's found in Iraq. Mm. And that's why we're still there today. And we're in Afghanistan for much of the same reason. And the cost of these two wars that we're engaged in, that's Iraq and Afghanistan, has so far cost $3 billion and counting. Mm. And it's put an enormous strain on our people and our resources. And yet our congressmen and senators do nothing to stop it when they have the power and authority to order all our troops and their equipment to return to the United States within 45 days. As I said before, the president has no war powers, and so whatever he could do, he could not stop or countermand this congressional order. That's the sum and substance of what's going on in Iraq and in Afghanistan.
Mm. In June 9th, or on June 9th, 2010, I remember that the U.S. General David Petraeus, the commander of the United States Central Command, CENTCOM, spoke actually at the Royal United Service Institute in London, and actually at that point announced that the U.S. military in cooperation with the USGS had found a huge, significant, that was his words, mineral deposit in Afghanistan as well. This is based out of some of the radar data that was done back in 2003, basically when the U.S. and the other allied forces invaded Afghanistan. No coincidence, right? They're there because they want to grab the mineral resources out of Afghanistan.
Yes, we fully intend to exploit the mineral resources of that country. It's very much the same thing that happened in the Anglo-Boer War in 1899. Now, this is a war that, in my opinion, was the most significant war, and it showed many, many things, particularly that a small nation that has determination to resist can not be defeated, because you cannot win the hearts and minds of unless you can win the hearts and minds of those people, you're never going to be able to rule in peace.
Mm.
And the Anglo-Boer War was a mighty marathon